everybody, welcome back to my channel, The Francophile Reader. So about a month ago, I polled you all in the community tab, and one of the most popular videos that you wanted me to make is a wrap-up video. So today I am making a wrap-up video of all the books that I read in July 2020. The reason why I haven't made wrap-up videos in the past is twofold. First, I don't always read as many books as other booktubers seem to read. So even though I read 8 books this month, that's a lot of books for me. I usually don't read 8 books in a month. The reason why I read so many books in July as well as in June is because I have my qualifying exams in August, and they're based off of a list of books that essentially comprise the French canon. So that's why. And you'll also notice that almost all the books on this list are written in French, though most of them, if not all of them, there is an English equivalent for. And I will include both the original language text as well as a translated version in the description. The second reason is that I tend to read really obscure books, and I had tried making some wrap-up videos in the past, but they're so obscure, tend to be academic books that you can't really buy at a bookstore, and even if you could, they would just be way too expensive. So I didn't really see the value of it. But evidently you all want to see what I've read in a month, so this is your video. I'm just going to tell you what books I read in the order I read them. And please note that not all the books on this list are necessarily books that I would have picked up, out of my own, volition. These are books that I picked up because I have to. And so keep that in mind. So the first book I read in August was Nadja by André Breton, a book I did not get on with. So André Breton tells the story of his encounter with a woman who calls herself Nadja. She's a woman that, at the end of this book, we learn has been admitted in a mental asylum, psychiatric ward. So she is someone who is mentally ill, and he's basically telling her story without her permission. He romanticizes her. She's like the manic pixie dream girl. I felt it's extremely exploitative, and he's always talking about how much Nadja appreciates his other writings. So André Breton was a really famous leader of the surrealist literary movement in France, and he's always talking about how much Nadja appreciates his own work. One of the big themes of his work is chance and chance encounters, and appreciating those moments that come out of nowhere. This is definitely just not the book for me, and I think the biggest issue I had was the posture of the author with respect to his subject, which was a person who is very vulnerable, and he essentially exploits her story and romanticizes it. And I can't with books like that. But it is an important book in the literary canon, and I know many people have enjoyed it, so maybe you will too. Then I read Lamo by Marguerite Duras, which is translated as The Lover. So this is the autobiography, in a sense, a memoir by Marguerite Duras of when she was 15 years old, living in Vietnam, when Vietnam was under French colonial rule. It was Indochina. She has a sexual relationship with a 28-year-old Chinese man, and that's The Lover. And, I'm aware that different countries have different standards, but even she admits that the relationship was illegal. It's hard to read because of that. But it is her story, and she does valorize it, and for her it was a very, it was somewhat of a liberating experience. Though I'm sure relationships like that are not liberating experiences for many 15-year-olds in such unequal relationships. At times I thought the prose was very beautiful, at other times I felt like it was purple prose. Again, maybe it's just the fact that I'm American, and reading a book about a relationship between a 15-year-old and a 28-year-old just doesn't sit well with me. But there you have it. Another book that's really important. Marguerite Duras is famous for writing the script for Hiroshima Mon Amour, Hiroshima My Love. It's actually a film I really liked, and I want to read her script. So I would read other things by Duras. this was just a really hard book for me to enjoy. Then we move back a few centuries because Breton and Duras lived in the 20th century. La Quête du Saint Graal was written, I believe, in the 12th century. It is a Grail legend. So the first Grail legend was Chrétien de Troyes' Percival, okay? Percival is the first book to mention the Grail, okay? The Grail was first written about by Chrétien de Troyes, who is French. So the Arthurian legends were largely written in French first. Then there is, I believe, Robert de Boron's version. And then there is La Quête du Saint Graal, The Quest of the Holy Grail, which is part of the prose Lancelot, or the Vulgate cycle, as it is called, which is a series of books, so many thousand pages of story about Arthur and the different knights of the Round Table. There's like a story about Merlin, and there's a story about the Grail. Whereas in Percival, the Grail is just a magical dish. I haven't read Percival, but that's my understanding. In The Quest of the Holy Grail, which is part of the Vulgate cycle, the Grail is a chalice, which is how the Grail has been received ever since. And it is the chalice, I don't think it is the chalice from which Jesus drank at the Last Supper, although it might be that as well. But it is primarily the chalice in which the blood of Christ on the cross was collected by Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph of Arimathea's son, Josephe, or Josephus, I think in English, was the first Christian bishop. You have several knights who are on this quest to see the Grail. But we know from the beginning that the only knight who will ever be able to appreciate the mysteries of the Grail is Galahad, who was Lancelot's son. Lancelot will never be able to see the Grail because he is not a virgin. He is not chaste, and that's the big theme in this story, is that those who are not chaste, and particularly those who are not virgins, are sinners, and therefore they cannot see the mysteries of the Holy Grail. The two other knights who can go on this quest are Bors and Percival. So Percival, of course, coming from the story of the same name by Chrétien de Troyes. So those are the three who can see the Grail, but the only knight who can really appreciate the mysteries of the Holy Grail is Galahad, who is Lancelot's son, and we know that there is a seat reserved for him at the Round Table. Only he's allowed to sit in it. It is a great story. There's a lot going on. It's very rich in imagery, and throughout the story you have these Cistercian monks. They're called hermits, but they're dressed in white, okay, who interpret all of the dreams and all of the visions the different knights have. It is pretty preachy, but I think magical enough that it makes up for it. I definitely recommend it. I think it's a lot of fun. Then I read a very, very academic book that no one's going to read except me, and that's Embodying the Word, Textual Resurrections in the Martyrological Narratives of Fox, Crespin, Daubès, and Daubigné by Catherine Randall Coates. So I'm at the very beginning of my thesis. I am currently working on writing my PhD proposal. It's different than in like the UK, where you have to come into a PhD program with a proposal already written. In the US, you do coursework for a few years and then you deliver your proposal. And I want to work on martyrologies in the 16th century. So Fox, Crespin, Daubès, Théodore Daubès, who was Calvin's successor in Geneva, and Agrippa d'Aubigné all talked about Protestant martyrs. And so this was a book that talks about martyrologies, how martyrologies, like Protestant martyrologies, differ from Catholic hagiography, which is Catholic saints, and she particularly looks at these four authors. I thought it was a really good book, but again, I don't know anybody else would read it. Then I reread a play, La Placeguayale by Corneille, which is translated as The Royal Palace, I think. And this follows a man named Alidor who doesn't really want the burden of being married to this woman named Angélique. And yet he has a friend who loves Angélique, and so he decides that he writes this letter pretending that he is courting another woman, and then his servant gives it to Angélique. Angélique is convinced that Alidor is cheating on her, and she breaks up with him. But instead of going with Clitandre, she goes with another man. And so he tries again to unite Angelique with his friend. This was a play that was criticized by Corneille himself. Corneille was a 17th century playwright because it violates unity of time. That's actually the unity that might be violated the least. Unity of action, because there are actually two actions. The first action is the first strategy that Alidor takes. That fails, so he has to try a second strategy. And it also violates the other Aristotelian unity, which is unity of place. And so it's a play that was criticized by Corneille, but because it kind of deviates from the rules of classical theater, it is seen as a more modern play. I really enjoyed it. It was definitely good that I reread it. Because a lot of the plot kind of was over my head. I think this would be a really fun one to watch performed, though I think Le Cid is better. Then I read a collection of the Lay of Marie de France. Marie de France was 10th or 11th century poet. She wrote these poems in what are known as lay, which are in octosyllabes, so 8 syllables per line. AABB, I believe, is the rhyme scheme. And these stories somewhat deal with Arthurian legends, but they all have some magical elements. So we have the story of Bisclaveret, which is about a man who transforms into a werewolf 3 days a week, and his wife betrays him. We have a story about a man, a knight, who transforms into a goshawk, and he is in love with a woman whose husband, the king, has locked her in a donjon, which is like a tower. So all of these stories deal with women who are in unhappy marriages to kings who are extremely abusive, and they find love outside of marriage. That is kind of the basis of courtly love, right? That love doesn't exist in marriage, it exists outside of marriage. And I think that these would make for great retellings. So if you're ever looking for ideas for fairy tale retellings and you want to find a lesser known story, at least in the English speaking world, I highly recommend looking through the Lay of Marie de France. Then I read Notre de Paris by Victor Hugo. I'm not going to talk about this book here. I made almost 8 videos about it because that was our read-along book for June and July. I thought this was a really great book. As I think about, what a modern tragedy might be, Victor Hugo's Notre de Paris definitely constitutes a tragedy. The end is a little bit different than the Disney version, and yes, there are parts that go on and on about the city of Paris and about architecture, but that is also a major part of the story. So if you're interested, I will link all my videos down below. Then I read the Lettres écrites de Lausanne by Isabelle de Charrière. So these are letters written from Lausanne. They are fictional letters in 2 parts. In the first part, we are following a narrator who is supposed to, I guess, be Isabelle de Charrière, talking about her daughter Cécile, and her daughter is being courted by several suitors, and the mother is constantly doting on her daughter. She's afraid that her daughter will be hurt by these men, and so that's what the first part is about. And the second part is often referred to as Caliste, and it's a letter, it's this extended letter written by a man named William about this woman named Caliste, who comes from a less fortunate background. And it does complement the first part. The second part does relate to the first part. I think that if you are interested in like Jane Austen and those kind of stories about domestic lives and the lives of women in the household and like suitors and all that, I think you will really like these letters. I'm someone who has always struggled with Jane Austen because it's usually not my thing to read about marriage and suitors and things like that. But yeah, if you like that kind of stuff, you might want to try the letters. And finally, I read the biography of Toussaint Louverture, which is called Toussaint Louverture, A Revolutionary Life by Philippe Girard, and I made an entire video about that. Toussaint Louverture led the first successful slave rebellion. His rebellion led to the independence of Haiti, and this book really looks at the complexity of his character and the decisions that he made, it's a less than flattering portrait. But I think it's also a really interesting look at the economic questions that newly emancipated slaves were faced with, and also just the politics of the period. So yeah, these are all the books that I read in July. As you can tell, this is a difficult video for me to make because I haven't really made one of these in a long time. Hopefully this was interesting to you. My favorite book on this list would probably be The Lay of Marie de France. Let me know if you've read any of these, or if any of these have piqued your interest, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.